Hello and welcome to Inside the Avatar Studio. Inside the Avatar Studio brings together innovation leaders from the virtual technology frontier to discuss perceptions, perspectives, and predictions of what being virtual means in today's society. I'm your host, Kevin Feenan, president of Rockcliffe University Consortium, and with me today is our very special guest, Wiz Nordberg. My apologies.
Wiz Nordberg is okay.
Wiz is the founder and CEO of Treet TV, formerly known as SLCN, and the world's first virtual television network of entertainment and lifestyle programs. SLCN started streaming live events from Second Life in March of 2007, and now, as Treet TV, continues to cover live high-profile events for Linden Labs and others. In the physical world, Wiz is a software engineer and serial entrepreneur who has years of experience in the tech sector and venture-funded startups. He was the system architect in several commercial software products, and in 1996, Wiz established a respected web development agency in Melbourne, Australia. Projects focused on entertainment properties for major record companies like BMG, Universal Music, Warner Music, and others. In 1999, this led to a new division that pioneered broadband webcasting in Australia with the Mushroom 25th Anniversary Concert of the Century. Recently, Wiz has provided expertise to tech startups as a consultant with the Australian government and commercialization programs. Wiz, welcome to Inside the Avatar Studio.
Thank you much. Good to be here.
Yeah, we always seem to get an opportunity to chat whenever we're not in front of a camera, and this is actually going to be kind of neat. And I guess one of the first questions I want to ask you is, I mean, it essentially, and I hope nobody takes this the wrong way, but welcome to the hour-long Treet TV gets to infiltrate metaverse hour.
Go ahead.
We got an hour-long infomercial. No, hopefully not.
Metaverse TV is welcome to come and infiltrate Treet as well. We're happy to return the favor.
Awesome. So one of the things I wanted to talk about was this idea of the growing relationship between broadcasting and virtual environments, and what this sort of means in light of where innovation has sort of been going over the last little while. I mean, quite obviously, you've seen a lot of innovation sort of come and go over the last 4 years since you first started Treet TV, and certainly with the growth of the Apple iPod and now the iPad, and Nokia's jumping in with their own products, and we have Androids and all this other innovation that's sort of hitting us very quickly and very fast. How do you see this sort of starting to blend together, especially from what you're doing with the broadcasting of these particular types of programming in based on virtual worlds?
Well, that's a big question.
We ask the big questions here. That's what we get paid for.
Okay, I'd sort of like to maybe look at that in two parts. Number one, you're referring to a pretty major transformation on one hand, which is occurring within the online spaces, especially mobile, and the word broadcast came up a lot in what you were saying. And before I talk about anything that we're doing or is going on in virtual worlds, I think one of the major changes that we've seen on the web in the past 5 years is that 6 years ago, nothing was immediate. Well, it was a rare exception that you would actually have live contact with people online. We had chat rooms on Yahoo. There was IRC chat. There was, people did webcasts, but those things were 1 or 2% of the kind of communication that people did online. Most of the communication online was done through blogs, through post-produced video. YouTube was just getting started, and now things have. The word broadcast, and I'm not even sure we have a word for it. I suppose broadcast is a good enough word, because technologies now like Twitter, live stream, and everything needs to be immediate. When you go to your Facebook page, if people don't see what you type within 2 or 3 seconds, you think there's something wrong. And I think that the entire culture of the internet is changing to one of immediacy, where everyone needs to touch one another all the time when they're doing things. I go to a restaurant, I say, wow, there's a great meal. I send a photograph. Within seconds, people come back and they say, oh, I like that, or whatever. That kind of immediacy just didn't exist 5 years ago to the degree that it does now. So, and I think that that's been fueled by a whole lot of things, and I think maybe one of the biggest things is probably mobile. And I think mobile technologies, especially the transformation, the push that Apple gave the mobile industry to finally realize that phones need to serve all of those internet needs that they promised to for 10 years but never did. And so now everyone's expectations have gone up so much. So the world of broadcast television is probably being dragged along by the internet to become more and more immediate. And I think that while that wasn't probably one of the motivations for starting SLCN and Treet, I think one of the big opportunities for anyone that does broadcasting is to plug into that new immediacy that exists online.
Well, that's kind of interesting, because if we look at some of the successful shows that are on Treet TV at the moment, I mean, certainly there's Metanomics, Tonight Live, The First Question, Designing Worlds, Isty's Eduverse. I mean, most of these are 1 hour type block programs. And in some cases longer, depending, I mean, some of the sports programs I would imagine go a little bit longer than that. The relationship then between this idea of immediacy and the way in which a number of programs are currently structured, do you see there being a bit of a disconnect then between sort of where we've taken things versus potentially where they may need to go?
Well, one of the things everything we've done is always live. Okay, so since day one. In fact, I think out of 4,000 episodes, almost 4,000 episodes, I think maybe 10 of them were done some other way other than live. And that's interesting, because I think that one of the things we've learned is that all the different types of media that you use that surround some live event are amplifiers for that event. So one of the big observations we've had over the past few years is that our biggest role is as an amplifier. And that and it's almost like somebody's taken a megaphone. When a show happens, that somebody's taken a megaphone out and said, okay, this is happening now. And those echoes roll over that event for weeks after that sometimes, where people begin to download and everything. But after 2 to 3 months, that sort of amplification effect dies down, and only the shows that actually have some staying power continue to get downloaded. So I think our challenge, it's not even it's so much of a challenge. The big observation we've had is that that being able to do that amplification among a large number of stakeholders is probably the key to success in these areas. And although we really love virtual worlds, and I think that we are further ahead of the curve than I probably thought we were in 2007, meaning that the world really has to catch up to what we're doing in order to make that audience large enough to begin to easily monetize it.
Yeah, I know you were, a couple of interviews that you've been doing over the last couple of months, you had sort of referred to, and I'm just trying to find my quote here, but talking a little bit in terms of the size of the market and the fact that we're maybe tapping into a market that's at best like 100, maybe 150,000 people currently. But that's not really sustainable in terms of a market, and really that we have more R&D that needs to be done inside this environment. So, I mean, I guess one of the things I'm interested in is your perspective in terms of how that R&D may potentially be taking place, and what are some of the drivers of that you're seeing based on your experience in the last couple of years?
Well, I think we're sitting right here in the middle of that R&D, and I think one of the frustrations people have with Second Life is that the forward motion of this technology has stopped. Whereas at one point, every month that would go by, we felt that we were in a growing, evolving, something new happening. Forterra would come along. There was Caneva. Everyone was suddenly investing money in taking things to the new level. Voice appeared. I mean, and these were significant features that came along in 2008. And I think one of the biggest problems is that people have stopped investing in that forward motion, and I think a lot of the forward motion we're seeing right now is being made by users and people who are taking the technologies that are actually not changing that much right now and investing a lot of time into trying to find new and innovative ways to use them. But I think, unfortunately, the R&D that's going to make this technology spread out to the mainstream has a lot to do with more to do with the technologies upon which virtual worlds are based than upon how we use them. And Treet is really a how we use them technology. We're doing something that's very conventional, that probably is very close to the way people would have filmed Pac-Man in 1979. Like honestly, if you had like one of those Pac-Man games from the bar that you used to sit and play, I suspect if you called a video production company back then and said, "Listen, we need to film this," they would do it very much the way we have. So although there's a lot of little detailed innovations, trying to get things to work more reliably online, the real innovations are the underlying technologies we're using, not sort of the mashups that we're creating around them.
Right. Okay. And again, I'm going to refer back to a couple of other interviews that you've done in the past, because there was one, and I believe it was with Bixley Stifton, where one of the things that you were talking about at that particular point in time was this idea that a lot of the content that we have right at the moment is breaking down into this idea of being differentiated by either documentaries or storytelling. And I guess to a certain extent is the technologies that we're looking at and some of the things that we've been hearing about. I mean, if we look at certainly OpenSim, I mean, there's a couple of groups that are trying to expand that particular platform to pick up where Linden Lab is sort of, let's be honest, they've dropped the ball in terms of, where they sort of left us for a couple of years ago. But there's other groups that are out there that are trying to pick that up. So how does the technology sort of help those people that are trying to do the documentary type program versus the storytelling one?
Well, I think convincing virtual worlds environments help everybody. Whether you're trying to create machinima, whether you're trying to create convincing interactive stories, no matter what you're trying to do, the more convincing it is, the more transparent it becomes, the better. I think that notion that the technology needs to be transparent is probably one of the enablers of good content production. When you look at a movie like Avatar or something that has a really great CGI effects, the more the technology disappears and the story alone comes out, the more successful that is. And one of the challenges we have is we're using technologies that require forgiveness and don't have that transparency. And that's very obvious when you take something that's produced in a virtual world and you show it to someone who is who does mainstream television. The instant quirkiness of the environment is still there, and I think that forgiveness has to disappear and be replaced with complete transparency, so that people I'll give an example, which is kind of interesting, if I can. Is that okay, Phelan?
Yeah, by all means.
Okay. One of our show producers, Safia Widdishins, has a show called Designing Worlds. And one of the interesting things she's doing, which is separate from what she does with us, she has a comic strip called The Search for the Golden Prim. Now, I'll tell you, one of the really interesting differences between that comic strip is produced by taking very carefully produced photographs in Second Life and producing something that looks like a comic book. And one of the interesting differences is when people look at that, they are not even aware that it was done in Second Life. I mean, you can well imagine the process. You know, you make sure that the photographs don't have any arms going through people's thighs. You make sure that the textures are good, and you might even touch it up in Photoshop a little bit. And there's no question that a really, really nice build and some great clothing and great avatars can be used to produce very high-end comic book realism of a kind that people actually take note of. It's quite stunning, and I think that she has a chance to get actual comic book distribution channels outside of Second Life by doing some of that. Whereas I think with Machinima, we are always up against the problem of trying to get someone who has no idea what this environment is to respond to it, and it's not the quality of the creative. You know, there are some really, really, really creative people sitting right in this room, in fact. You know, and I think that you know, I'm looking at Pookie out there who has done some really amazing things, and I think that always the challenge is we've got this tool that we're always battling with. And I think until that battle becomes easier and until the tools get better, we're always going to be in this smaller market that is struggling with sustainability. And that's what being an early adopter is and being ahead of the curve is. You just have to hang out until the time comes.
Well, it's interesting that I hear you say that, because I've had similar conversations with a few other people in terms of this idea that, and I guess the way I've sort of proposed it is, you know, we're still in sort of, you know, VRML version 2, so to speak. I mean, it's not VRML, but I mean, it's in terms of virtual reality markup language, but I mean, it's certainly sort of like a second generation of where virtual reality was in the late 1990s. But things are still very much brute force in here. And I mean, in terms of the tool battles, I completely sort of agree with you on that. I guess one of the things that I'm interested in is, you know, and my apologies. No, I'm thinking about how I'm going to phrase this.
Can't wait.
I don't know. Sometimes the train leaves without me. It starts, and then it's just sort of like, wait a second, what was the number of the train? You know, this idea that, you know, maybe there's something in here that we've missed, that maybe there's something about being virtual that is not about being an avatar. It's about the personas that we wrap around us. You know, and I get we're going to pick on Pookie here, because I mean, Pookie's a really good example of this. I mean, she's got a number of different avatars that she uses to engender a persona and a specific look and a feel. But if we look at what 20-somethings are doing right at the moment, they're not in virtual worlds. They're in Facebook. They're in Twitter. They're in, you know, the other different social networking sites that they're wrapping themselves in, which have nothing to do with what we're doing in here. And I guess one of the things I'm curious about is how, you know, there were some comments made earlier that you guys are starting to look at now, hybrid virtual reality live type programming as part of what you're doing with Treet TV. And I'm wondering how you see part of that fitting in with that sort of hybrid model, and what we might be able to start seeing going forward with some of these ideas.
Well, I'll have to say that the things that you're talking about there that we're doing are just experiments. It's a learning experience for us. And we do have a pretty engaged market that we can put our hands around. That's good. Okay, we've actually built a market that, you know, like we'd probably compare with a television station in a small town, you know, that has a town of 200,000 or something, that actually can see the people that, you know, we have a fairly intimate relationship with viewers, and that's all good. But to that extent that we're doing new things, they're really all experiments. I don't think that there is sort of I don't think it's easy. I don't think there are easy ways to compare things like Facebook and Twitter and virtual worlds. I think one of the biggest mistakes Linden Lab made was believing that Second Life, that was casting Second Life in the mantle of a social networking tool because it happened to be the popular vernacular of the day. I think that led them to lose comprehension of what their own product was and what it was supposed to do. Each of these tools, you know, 20 somethings aren't using Second Life probably for you know, reasons that are. Second Life is not lean. It is not a thin social tool. It is not a one-click gratification tool. There are probably myriads of reasons why Second Life can't be used by large numbers of people that can instantly use Twitter and use Facebook. I think that the other problem with virtual worlds, especially like Second Life, is that Second Life you can look out on the web and point to 100 specialized technologies. You can look at technologies designed to do web conferencing, technologies designed to do social networking, technologies designed to make meetings better, to make it possible for you to role play and write scripts. And there are a lot of specialized technologies out there, and Second Life does them all. And that is both its strength and liability. I think that in order to reach a market effectively, you need to make it easy for people to understand what your product does, and it's very hard to market a product that does everything, especially when it consumes a tremendous amount of time to get to the point where you can master it. So I think that there's another thing that I'll just close with and that is, I think also nothing has. There's no question that I believe that living virtual, if we want to call it that, is probably the most powerful way to exist online. And I think that's been our motivator from the beginning. And yet I think that one of the things I kind of hoped for that never happened is that something would catalyze that marketplace. And I'll give you a good example. I'll go back to comic books. Electronic comic books have existed for a long, long time. In fact, there's a very, very successful iPad product from a company called Comixology that has been publishing online comic books for 10 years. And they never had any traction before the iPad come along, because the comic book market was convinced that you had to have this paper thing that you bought in shrink wrap and you took home and you collected in a certain way. And the iPad has sort of catalyzed that market by enabling people who were early adopters 10 years ago to suddenly realize the benefits of their perseverance and actually find a way to make that happen. And I think virtual worlds are sort of the same thing. I think something has to happen to catalyze that market. And I think we thought, you know, when Bruce Willis was on SLCN, we thought, it's happening. And now I think that the biggest thing that I realize is, okay, we're still ahead of the curve, and there's a lot of patience required.
Sort of like Mr. T advertising World of Warcraft. I guess a couple of things that I want to pick up there. I mean, one is you mentioned this idea in terms of how Linden Lab sees the product, and I'm wondering in terms of, and I'm referring not just to Second Life, but also to OpenSim, because I sort of see them joined at the hip. Although I realize some groups are taking things off in a slightly different direction. I mean, where do you see the placement of the product, really? I mean, in terms of, you know, from a technology standpoint.
The placement of Second Life versus
well, I mean, yeah, I mean, and in terms of, well, here's the thing. In conversations that I've had with some of the Lindens, there's dichotomy in terms of how they're trying to see their own product. And one of the things that we don't have from them is a really good definition of where this product fits in the grand scheme of all the other specialized web tools, right, that are out there.
Yeah.
And on one hand, they're talking about it being a collaboration platform. On another hand, they're talking about it being a game. On the other hand, they're talking about it being a social networking platform. And
that lack of focus is going to be their undoing, I swear, unless they decide to drop to drop the 50 things that they wish Second Life could be and focus on the one thing that they're going to bet on. I think they're always going to have trouble. I mean, I think one of the biggest problems, it's not just with Second Life, it's with it was with Forterra's product, although Forterra had an interesting, Forterra was at least focused in the approach on their product. You know, one of the biggest problems that these products are not very slippery. They don't, the instant gratification is virtually non-existent. And if you have a product like that, that doesn't mean you don't have a market. There are plenty of products out there. You know, Final Cut Pro doesn't have instant gratification, and yet it's the most successful video production tool in the world now, you know, and it takes you months to learn. So there's nothing wrong with having a product that doesn't have instant gratification. And I think one of the problems with a lot of these products, and Second Life especially, is that they haven't embraced the fact that you need a well-trained user in order to appreciate the value of their product. And they keep somehow believing that they're going to make it easier and faster. And it's already fun. I won't argue with the fun part, but making it easy, I just would challenge them to do that without tearing down the whole house and rebuilding it. So I think that I see them struggling to want. I see their wishes and the realistic abilities to make their product to be divorced from one another. I think they wish the product were something that it's not, and management is acting as if those wishes were reality.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard the same from a number of other people, and it's interesting to see different people's perspectives on sort of where we've been and where we currently are. Right, the big challenge is going to be where are we going to. I want to come back to an interview that you did with Lowell Creemore, and hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly.
I didn't realize I've done so many interviews.
Oh, yeah, in the last couple of months, you've done a whole pile of them. So there was lots of material that I could go back and take a look at, and it's absolutely great because I mean you're an absolute wealth of knowledge and experience in these fields. So
opinions.
Well, I mean, one of the things that you were talking about was this idea that one of the things that you in Texas want to do with Treet TV is to reach out to independent machinima producers, and that partnerships are a very huge part of Treet TV. But over the last little while, we've been talking about the technology side of things, and I want to talk a little bit more about the people side of things. How do you see the blending of these two coming together in order to reach that independent market? Because it sounds as if that's one of the core things that you're looking to tap into over the next phase of R&D, or however you want to look at it. I mean,
one of the good things about all that I was saying that was about Second Life not being a place for instant gratification, one of the things that's absolutely true is that the people that produce our shows and that we work in partnership with are not instant gratification people. They are people who are dedicated and take a lot of time. I mean, making good television series in virtual worlds or good machinima is not something that you say, oh, I have a great idea, and later that afternoon, there it is, instant gratification. So the marriage of this type of production with Second Life is actually, in many ways, a marriage made in heaven, because it does have the flexibility to do anything, and the people who we work with are people that are sort of in it for the long term. And I think that's been very, very important to us. I mean, most of our shows have been running for years, and although people are always struggling how to figure out to make them more sustainable, there is a passion and a desire to keep experimenting, keep them going, and find new markets. And I think that finding of new markets is actually happening slowly. You know, like we've had several shows where people who are completely outside the Second Life arena have gotten involved in the show. And I think that's been very, very exciting to us. So those partnerships are really, really important to us. They're the thing that makes the network work. In fact, the producers are the thing that actually make the shows happen. And our sort of job is to try to figure out how to give them what they need.
Right. So is there, do you see there being a, because I mean, we're with the Virtual World's Best Practice Conference, which is coming up, we're doing something unique this year in that we're introducing a very large machinima type track, and there is a whole pile of budding, I don't know if this is the right word, machinimists that are out there, and they're trying to get their content, places to put it. I mean, obviously there's YouTube and what have you, but as we found with one person, I mean, depending on, what type of music you put with it, I mean, half your content could disappear. So, I mean, there's certainly challenges with some of the outlets that these people have. Do you see this really, I guess, this convergence between what we're doing here and, again, I sort of want to come back to mobile. Do you see this becoming more and more something that's going to go into the hands of the everyday person, or is this still going to remain in the hands of producer specialists that are going to really be focused on that one particular type of market?
You mean in terms of actually producing these things?
Yeah, because I mean we have, I mean, obviously through YouTube we have this wealth of people that are out there that want to make video.
Right. The world is filled with, and people are doing, I mean, machinima.com has like 30 million monthly views or something. I mean, people are producing amazing amounts of homegrown machinima every single day. So I don't, to me, this is a journey that is going forward, and the rate of change may change from year to year as different catalysts that cause it to accelerate, but there's no question that there will be more people doing it next year than there are this year, and way more people doing it, the year after, and that those who can stick with it and be fast on their feet are going to have nothing but opportunity over the next few years. So there's no question it's moving forward, and I think that, I think as with all, this is pretty new too. I mean, this is something, 4 years ago, this was almost non-existent, so 4 years, 5 years, that's not very long. And I think that, maybe the mistake I made sometimes is we feel like the world is moving so fast, like Second Life time and technology time, I think, oh my God, Christmas, that was like years ago, but the truth is that kind of gets you in trouble because you expect the world to change with you. And I think that doesn't, the world takes a little bit longer, so I think that if we simply scale back our expectations to real life time, we'll actually find that the opportunities will come plenty fast.
Yeah, no, can't we afford to wait though? That's
right. Well, that's the problem. It's almost like if 3 years ago, people that are quitting now would have actually planned on it taking 10 years, they might have been on the right track. It's almost like it's the expectation that I'll be rich in a year, or everything is going to be working great, within a year, that kills you because you budget for a certain amount of your life instead of saying, listen, this could take 5 years or 10 years. Are we sure we're up for that? In fact, we've had a couple roundtable meetings at Treet, especially during 2008, where the top item of the agenda was, are we sure we're up for this? Because when you actually realize that once you start something, you either have to keep it going until the market is there, or you've wasted your effort. It's a tough decision sometimes.
So how do you, and actually Texas is sort of leading into this, I mean, how do you make that decision between having consistency in what you're doing versus trying to identify whether or not, I'm trying to figure out a very polite way of putting this, but I mean, because in all honesty, I've had this conversation with some of the people at Rockcliffe myself in terms of.
I was just about to mention Rockcliffe.
Well, I mean, it's here it is, and you're in the same position we are, right? I mean, you're going through, you're doing all this stuff, you're in the red, right? Which is not a good situation to be in, and I mean the same as everybody else that's around us. I mean, we all understand that there's opportunity here, but at some point, there's a difference between being consistent and being pig-headed is not the right word, but I mean, I think you know where I'm going with this, right? I mean, there's a difference between having vision of where things are going to go and having society and technology pass you by and not realizing that you're on the completely wrong track. And where
Right.
do you because I mean you have to be positioned to jump at opportunity when it comes, but at the same time, if you're not positioned for that, then you can't do it.
Yeah, the biggest decision entrepreneurs face is when to quit and do something else.
Yeah.
And there's an argument. There are arguments for there are arguments for both sides. I mean, one thing for sure, you have to go after things aggressively. And, if you have something you think has value, you have to measure that value and say, well, I don't want to lose that value. And so you're always balancing that. You're saying, okay, we spent 3 years building this value. What is that value? The very important you be objective and say, is it actually worth anything? And then if it is, then you say, okay, well, what do we do to make it sustainable? And if it isn't, then you say, and this is the tough decision, then you say, we'll stop. We'll do something else. There's plenty of other opportunities. And I think that sort of fear that all that time is wasted is the enemy, because there may be some amazing success waiting for you if you just spend the next 6 months doing the right thing, and the last 3 years become irrelevant. And so you're constantly at those junctures all the time.
Yeah, I believe me, I completely and totally relate to that.
Throwing things away is the biggest entrepreneurial skill there is. In fact, Twitter is a great example. Twitter was formed by a group of people that their brilliant idea was to do a podcast aggregation product called Odeo, and Twitter happened by accident. And the smartest thing they ever did was put a big X through Odeo and just completely forget about it, even though there was an amazing amount of psychological mind share they had invested in it. I have nothing but respect for people that can just pull out the revolver and shoot the current thing they're in love with and move on to the next thing. And sometimes you have to do that.
Mm. Yeah, you were quoted in a previous interview as saying that Treet TV is about gambling on the future, and I think one of the things I'm interested in is because I think we've talked a little bit about it and we've talked a little bit around it, but what are you finding really is the attraction that's sort of keeping you here in terms of, because we know this is an R&D exercise, we know we've got. There's more things to come. There's more things that have to get here before we're there, right? And there has to be an attraction. There has to be something that's really, getting you up in the morning and saying, I'm looking forward to doing this.
Well, there are two things.
Yeah, other than Texas, I already know that she's...
No. One thing is we actually enjoy our own shows. All right, there's one thing, so independent of whether there's an opportunity or anything like that, we did sort of scale back our production about 6 months ago. We sort of we used to do live broadcasting all week, and we sort of consolidated that into 2 pretty full production days. And one of the things we realized is, okay, we can sustain that schedule forever. It's not we sort of said, okay, the 2000 Gartner wasn't right, and 80% of the world is not in Second Life right now, even though that's not quite what they said. I think a lot of people felt, oh, that must be what it really means. So one thing is we like our own shows, and we're very impressed with the work that our producers do, and we like seeing them grow, and we like trying to help make that happen. There's no question that if you look at shows that were done 2 years ago by the same producers, you can see an amazing amount of growth and maturity in the work that's been done. And that just makes it more and more accessible and makes it makes there a greater and greater chance that some catalyzing event will happen where all of a sudden something will actually break out into the mainstream, or even into a market that's maybe 5 to 10 times bigger, which is not mainstream, but still would be great. The other thing is I believe absolutely that what we're doing is a new way of making film that will eventually change dramatically the landscape of what appears on mainstream television and the cinema. And, you know, the word eventually is really in huge red bold-faced letters there, but the ability to dispense with the expensive sets, to be able to tailor the look of people using avatars and clothing, you know, it essentially replaces a complete, it replaces live television with something cheaper and more fluid, and it replaces the arduous process of animation with something that can, I believe, achieve the same results for a larger group of creators. So I have a real profound belief that this is an important new entertainment technology, and I don't want to lose out on that opportunity.
I guess I mean I've heard so many people that are so passionate about what they're doing in here, and certainly, you know, we're trying to do something very similar. You know, and it's quite difficult. It's partnerships are really the only way to sort of, I see, sort of getting through a lot of this stuff. I mean, from that standpoint, I guess, what's some of the things that you're sort of hoping to see over the next 4 or 5 years in terms of what's going to come out of a lot of this R&D? I mean, yeah, I hate to say the comic book fantasy world where Machinima and such is going. What really sort of needs to happen over the next 4 or 5 years to really get us to where you think we need to be?
Let's put it this way: if one of the most important thing to me is that some well-funded competitor comes along and makes us forget about Linden Lab. It's the most important thing to me that will have a huge impact on how much more time and money I commit to what we're doing. Because I think that although virtual worlds as a vague concept have many, many people in them, this is a very special type of virtual world that can be a film studio. This is a virtual film studio we're sitting into, and it is because of the versatility of this product. If it turns out that nobody out there can turn this into a large market, then a lot of while there'll be individual machinima opportunities and it will continue to grow, the actual explosion of seeing this become television probably won't happen that quickly until some real well-funded competitors come along and replace what we're sitting with here with something that is fast, easy, and fun.
I didn't know about that acronym. I just really don't.
I thought it was a great. Hey, I was all in favor of that. Fast, easy, and fun worked for me. I think it's just a matter of. I think it's easier said than done.
Oh, certainly. I think we discovered that the hard way in some cases. I mean, the idea of sort of being off the radar versus being on the radar. You know, I guess to a certain extent, and this is again one of your quotes from earlier, is that currently we're sort of off the radar, and this idea of being fast, easy, and fun, you know, really, do you see there being a place for this? I'm just trying to figure out how I haven't written out this question, so I'm just trying to figure out how to phrase it properly here. You know, right now, we're sort of flying under the radar of a whole pile of media corporations that are out there. And as much as, you know, there's going to be more and more people entering into this field, whether it's through Second Life or through Machinima or through mobile or through whichever else, is there such a thing as too small or too big a market from your perspective in here? I mean, is there a minimum level of sustainability that you see that we have to get to as part of that?
I think that every products and markets fit together in this, and when that marriage works, there's great synergy. There are products that cost $100,000 that have 1,000 users. Their market is 1,000, and it works great. And there are markets that cost 99 cents where there are 100 million people in that market. And I think that the people who create products are under the huge task of trying to plan their products and markets to create that beautiful synergy that happens when your product and the size of your market and the pricing you've chosen and the demand and the quality, when it all works, it's great. And so I don't think that bigger is better. I think that it might well be, for example, there are plenty of areas of tremendous traction that could survive without large markets. One of the things people like Cisco, Intel, and so forth used to invest quite a bit of money in doing Second Life, not only Second Life programming with us, but spending time and money in world doing things like that. Now, I think that, to be honest, there was probably 20% of their expectations probably got fulfilled for the large majority of people that they actually needed to have it fulfilled. But had they, if companies like that were to stick with it, I believe that it's not an enormous market, but I believe there is a lucrative market for people that really need to bring reality to their business world in using virtual worlds. I think there's a tremendous market there, and there could one of the examples I always use when talking about market size is, like, I ask people, well, do you think a show with 100 viewers on Treet could be sustainable? And people almost invariably say yes. And I say, what if they're all U.S. senators? And I think that to me illustrates the case where market size has very little to do with the success of things. So it's hard for me to answer that. I think that the desire to go mainstream is almost like the easy answer to success, but I don't actually think it's usually the right answer.
Right. The idea of bringing value into the business world, and again, this is something I've had some conversations with a few people on, actually in the last week of all things. One of the things that we've been noticing here is that it's so easy to bring large corporations into this environment. I mean, you've seen them, right? IBM's been in here. Google was in here for a while. We had a number of other big players. Dell was in here, and they spent hundreds of thousands of dollars, and then they sort of up and left, in part for exactly the reasons that you were specifying. I mean, they brought unrealistic expectations to a technology that they really didn't understand. Are there core values that you see companies really having to bring with them in order to get value, to bring value from here back to their real life business? I mean, are there specific aspects within that you sort of see as being imperative?
Well, I mean, I think how you measure success is really something people always have to know, and they have to think about what is the measure of that value. And I have to say that probably the best model for business is what you're doing and what is going on in education. To me, education is the number one success story of why virtual worlds can gain traction. And I think when you look at why they gain traction in education, you can apply that kind of traction very easily to many, many, many corporate problems. I mean, if you take a look at all the case studies of why education worked in virtual worlds when distance learning and other flatter technologies didn't, and you actually look at corporate training and corporate certification and corporate simulation problems, I think those very same things that you see in education are probably the biggest metrics for corporations, and I don't think it's virtual meetings. Do you agree with that? I mean, you're the expert on this.
Well, that's good to hear from somebody. I don't know. I mean, there's certainly one of the areas that is my area that I'm sort of expertise that I'm sort of looking into is this idea of knowledge transference. And corporate meetings and the ability to have people come in and be part of a social crowd is all well and good, but at some point we have to really develop new knowledge, and we have to develop it at a pace that is consistent with the way innovation's running, which means not at a snail's pace. We got to be keeping pace with the way technology is running right now, which is just absolutely completely out of control. That's a very hard thing to do, especially with a platform that sort of, come to a grinding halt while they're figuring out what to do next. So, I mean, in terms of that particular aspect, there's I think we got a way to go. I think we've still got a lot of things that we need to understand before we can really get there, and there's some major pieces, and this is part of what I'm going to talk about at the Best Practices Conference, that we still have to understand and still have to do.
Let me ask you a question. I know you're supposed to be asking the questions, but early you asked me a question about what keeps me going and why do I do this. And I tell you, in my mind, I've got a lot of interesting stories that come from various experiences I've had that I call upon whenever I'm having doubts and I'm getting up and I'm just like, oh, why do we do this? Why do we do this? I sort of reach down and pull one of these out. And in the arena of education, there are a couple things. Like there was, I think it was Virtual Bacon that had a presentation in the very first Best Practices, and he was talking about virtual chemistry labs and how you had to get people to experience things in order for them to appreciate, and how he was doing this workshop in a classroom with virtual chemistry labs built in Second Life, and some teacher that was completely out of the loop and was really skeptical for it for the first time had that eureka experience and realized the moment you can actually simulate things like this and students can relate to them and as if they were real, it changes everything. And in 1988, of all time, 1987, I was actually working on a virtual simulation for helping people to learn to deal with emergencies in nuclear plants. And the president of the company I was working for was a real visionary. He believed that he was into the idea of 3D immersible, like 3D goggles and virtual reality equipment and everything. In 1988. And we did all this stuff on video disc with high-end computers. But basically, it became obvious to me back then that if you can take people into a nuclear plant and train them how to deal with emergencies, you can't do it in real life. You can't say, well, let's have a meltdown this afternoon and see what it's like. There are situations in education and in business where that type of simulation and that experience where the metrics go through the roof. And I guess my question for you is, why isn't that more obvious in education? Why is there any trouble at all getting traction in education?
The $64,000 question.
Yes, that's all. There you go.
Oh boy, we could be an hour on that one. Oh my!
But isn't
goodness.
it obvious? Am I right? Is it this type of thing is quite obvious, isn't it?
To me, it's obvious, but mind you, I see this as a game. I see what we're doing in here as being a complete and total game changer, not a little one, a big one, right? And this isn't. I mean, this isn't about being a cartoon character. This is about the way in which we are going to actually do and conduct business in the future, and it is going to substantially change the way in which we interrelate. Not only on a social scale, but also on a working scale. I mean, if you consider the three main spaces that people tend to live and work to basically live in, which is either work, family, or external social structures, right? So first, second, and third spaces, and this whole idea that what we're doing here right now is sort of having a big impact on our third space relationships. And it hasn't had a big impact on first and second space relationships, but it's going to. Because at some point, what we're doing here is going to merge with the operating system, and at that point, it's going to allow people to really control the way in which they do work. And I'm not talking, machinima. I'm talking, the nuts and bolts of what makes the rest of the world work short of ditch digging. I mean, to a certain extent, even there, because you can put a robotic, arm on Mars and have it dig ditches for you. But it's substantial. It's going to mean that the individual is going to be able to control their workspace. And right now, you can't do that. But the technology is here. The technology is sitting right in front of us. The ability to communicate and to connect with people is sitting right in front of us. And that's what I find is so invigorating about what we're doing. I don't see Second Life as being where things are going to be 5 years from now. I see it as being the catalyst from which all these other changes are going to springboard from. And whether Second Life is there to see it or not, I don't know. But to me, this is the game changer.
So, like me, you're sort of in the same boat then as I am. I believe this is real. I believe it must happen, and I believe that we're simply using the best tools we have available to us. But we can't give up on it because it's not going to go away, and the tools are going to get better, and more people are going to use it, and it's inevitable, and it's the better way. It's the good thing, right?
And there's so much that we are learning in this environment that as I'm going to use a newbie word. Newbies coming into this environment bring with them all of their preconceived notions of what their real world is like. And it takes them anywhere from 6 months to 2, 3, 4 years before they finally really start to understand exactly how big the changes are that are resulting from this area. I mean, I've been here for 5 years, and every year I'm in here, I'm learning something new, and we're not talking little things. We're learning substantial things about the nature of individuality and the nature of people and nature of social networks. And again, why this is so important. And I defy a newbie person to come in here and to be able to get that in a very short period of time. I think those are the rare exceptions. And the people that are spending the time that have been here for the last 3, 4, 5 years are really going to be the ones that are going to spearhead those changes into the future. If you're not in here now, 5 years from now, you'll have missed the boat. And I guess that's the way I'm looking. Yeah. That's sort of the way I'm looking at it.
It's funny. I actually think I think there's a culture change that will occur. And I see it everywhere else, so it has to happen here. There were years ago, my mother would not have been able to do anything online, and she's to my horror, actually, a little bit. She's one of my Facebook friends now. It's terrible having your mother and other people be both your friends on Facebook at the same time, trying to manage those things. But, it's obvious that things like Facebook and Twitter and the web and even mobile connectivity have gotten to the point where the years have passed that have taken lots of people to actually have that be one of the parts of their world. And, one of the most exciting things, I think, for all of us, when the Avatar movie came out was I think, the feeling that what we know suddenly is touching hundreds of millions of people. And I think maybe the underlying reason why that's so exciting is because that's the beginning of the kinds of things that make culture change, to the point where where the noob would no longer have to wonder and would actually know even before they got there, oh, well, that's a virtual world or whatever it's called. It's gonna be the best way for me to do this. And I just think those culture changes are so we have that culture here, And I think we're just waiting for the rest of the world, but it seems like it's got to happen.
Mm. Yeah, and I guess to a certain extent, I'm not quite sure how that's going to materialize as we go over the next few years. Right?
We're too old to know.
Well, not necessarily.
No,
right?
I'm just joking.
You'd be surprised. I mean, Thinker has, Thinker comes in and he does a lot of stuff here at Rockcliffe, and I tell you something, you've got to absolutely respect somebody like that, because I mean, he knows so much more than a lot of us all put together, and he's, I'm not gonna say what. Where he's at in terms of age-wise, but let's put it this way. I mean, it just he's not a teenager, but I'd put him up against I'd put him up against a college full of 20-somethings any day, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So anyway, Wiz, I know the Meta World folks have to sign us off here. But I'd like to invite you to stick around for a little while and maybe answer some questions here, and we can continue the conversation for a little bit. But I'm going to allow Mel and Robert to sign us off here. I'd like to thank Mel Burns very much for again recording this for us. It is always wonderful to have him here to help us out with this, and Bevan Whitfield for helping to arrange everything and get it all produced. So, thank you guys very much. And, we'll catch everybody here in a month's time.